Good morning everybody, and welcome to a little tutorial series in which we are going to make some gloves. How exciting! Now, I made Dan a pair of gloves last year, if you remember, and I got lots of requests to do a tutorial on how I did that, because it can seem a bit daunting, I think, making gloves. And so this year I thought, let's get straight into it for the new year. As you can see, I've knit a glove. This is knit specifically to fit me, and I've just spotted there's one of my hairs there. Look, let's get rid of that. So this is custom fit to me. I'll pop it on in a second so that you can see. But this, for me, is really the joy of knitting gloves, because when you buy a pair of gloves, quite often, you know, the fingers won't be long enough, or the palm isn't long enough, or the glove itself just doesn't fit well. If you knit your own, you can totally make them fit exactly your hand. So let me just pop this on and I will show you. I could have made this a bit longer if I wanted to, but I think this is a good length to have under a coat. If you imagine my jumper sleeve is a coat, then it covers your wrist really nicely. I've knit this in fingering weight yarn. You can really knit gloves in any weight. I wouldn't go for bulky. I think that might just be a bit too big, because it's on your fingers. If it's a really thick yarn, I think it might make your fingers feel a bit clumsy. So I've gone for fingering weight yarn, which for me really is the perfect weight for gloves, because unlike mittens, gloves, you want to still be able to use your hands, and I think just having a fine knit fabric means that you can still use your hands like normal and they don't feel too big and bulky. I struggled to find a pattern, I'll be honest, so I actually went back to the book that I used to knit Dan's gloves, and I'm using this. So it's the Anne Budd Knitter's Handy Book of Patterns, which is a really great book. I'll show you, let me take my glove off so I can negotiate it. They're actually really warm, surprisingly, you know, and Dan will attest to the warmth of fingering weight gloves. This is just a sort of idea on what the book looks like. You can see it's quite wordy, lots of numbers, lots of information going on. But the basis of the book is that you work out what your gauge is. Once you work out what your gauge is, it's then dead easy, because you then just follow, for example, if your gauge is 8 stitches to the inch, you then look up to see what finished hand circumference you want. So for example, mine was 7 inches, so mine's the 3rd size along. My gauge was 8 stitches to the inch. I just go 1, 2, 3, and I know I've got to cast on 56 stitches. And then I know all the way through, all I've got to do is look at the numbers for the 3rd one along in the 8 gauge row. And that's how the book works. So if you were knitting on a DK weight, for example, and you maybe got 5 or 6 stitches to the inch, you would do the same thing. You would look across and see how many stitches you need for that particular gauge. So it's entirely up to you what pattern you choose. You could follow this book, you could choose a pattern that's on Ravelry, you might have a pattern already. The purpose of this tutorial is not to give you a pattern as such, but it's just to go through the processes involved in making a pair of gloves. So how do we do the gusset increases? And then what do we need to do after we take those stitches off, and whereabouts do we start knitting for the little finger and then the ring finger, and how do we go about working those, and how do we pick up the gap, and all these kinds of things that I think people find quite daunting. So choose your pattern. If you've got this book and you want to work from it, great, do that. If you've got a different pattern, I know there's a free pattern on Ravelry for fingering weight gloves, which is called Knotty Gloves, Knotty. I think it's Julia Mueller. That one is well used. There's lots and lots of projects on Ravelry. It's only one size, which I think is a 60 stitch size, which might be perfect for you. But again, you can fiddle with your gauge and downsize it a little bit if you want it to be a bit smaller, upsize it a bit if you want it to be a bit bigger. So that's one pattern that you might want to use. The instructions for different patterns are obviously going to be slightly different, and the way that things are done are slightly different, but the basic skills that you need are what I'm going to show you. So you can get started. Get your yarn, get your needles. I'm working magic loop. It's entirely up to you whether you work magic loop or whether you work with double points. The reason I like working magic loop for gloves is that I find it does make the fingers a bit less fiddly, because you've not got many stitches on your fingers. I think I had between sort of 14 and 18 stitches for my size. And working that even on 3 double points, I find just a bit too fiddly. But if you want to use double points, that's fine. But this tutorial will be for magic loop, because I think that's the most straightforward and least fussy way of knitting gloves. So grab your yarn, grab your needles, find your pattern, and then get cast on. What I want you to do is just work your rib. So you can cast on, work whatever rib the pattern tells you to do, and then just work to the point where you are going to begin these thumb gusset increases. So for me, I worked about 2.5 inches of 2x2 rib, and then I just knit 4 or 5 rows plain stocking stitch, and that is the point that I will see you back for the next tutorial. So if you wanted to cast on both gloves, get them both to the point of starting the thumb gusset, then by all means do that, and you can work them both at the same time on 2 separate needles, obviously. So I will see you back for the next tutorial, where we are going to be working the thumb gusset and then working all the way up to the top here, ready to be taking off those thumb stitches. So I will see you back soon.